Having been released in 1975 and with over 2 billion streams, Bohemian Rhapsody is the only song among the top 50 most listened to songs on Spotify of all time to have been released before the year 2000. And what has Bohemian Rhapsody got to do with the Mini Cooper S that I'm filming right now? Well, bear with me for 1 second. From a purely democratic standpoint, assuming that people listen to the songs that they like the most, we could argue that Bohemian Rhapsody is the best song of the 1900s. You'd think that a song that makes such an impact nearly half a century later would have been immediately recognized as a masterpiece when it was first released, and that was certainly not the case. A lot of critics hated Bohemian Rhapsody when it first came out, and in fact, it didn't even chart at #1 in so many countries. It didn't even chart at #1 in the United States. What I'm trying to say is that many times we need to see things through the lens of time to realize how good or how significant or how historic they were. And I think that this car, the Mini Cooper S, the R53 Cooper S, is a Bohemian Rhapsody, a car that we're just now getting to understand how good of a car it is. And why is it so good? Well, that's what I'm going to tell you in this video. When BMW bought the Rover Group in the mid-90s, Mini was not the asset that they thought would be most valuable. Back then, the brand built only the classic Mini, a car that was severely outdated and had a relatively low profit margin. Nonetheless, especially after facing much poorer than expected results from Rover itself, they decided that perhaps it'd be worth giving it a chance. They launched this generation of the Mini in 2000, and what a hit it was. The car was all new from the ground up, and all it shared with the classic Mini was its design, really. Except this new update had been drawn by none other than Frank Stephenson, the same guy who gave us the first generation BMW X5, the Ferrari F430, and later would go on to design the Fiat 500. I don't think Mini could have seen this coming, but the timing was just spot on too. The 2000s were the era when all these retro-looking cars became cool. We had the Volkswagen New Beetle, the PT Cruiser, the Prowler, the Thunderbird, the Ford GT, the Fiat 500, the Chevrolet SSR. Now, I know many of these cars aren't cool anymore, but back then they were all the rage. The car was an immediate sales success, and Mini positioned themselves as the premium brand in a segment that, back then, had no real premium competition aside from perhaps the Mercedes A-Class. This unit in particular is a 2005 Mini Cooper S that I borrowed from a friend. It's got a few aftermarket upgrades such as the AC Schnitzer bumpers and exhaust or the carbon fiber wing, but it's also very well equipped from the factory, having the optional John Cooper Works bucket seats and interior. One thing I could not tolerate in these first Minis was the hideous and uncomfortable central speedometer. If you're going to get one of these cars, it's almost mandatory that you get one with the optional chrono pack that places the speedometer in the proper location behind the steering wheel and gives you additional oil pressure and temperature gauges. Anyway, I digress. These first Mini Cooper S received codename R53, and is the way most enthusiasts still refer to today, with the normal Minis of this time being the R50s. This is, in my opinion, one of the few cars that could really be called designer cars. Every single aspect of the exterior and interior has been thought of with looks as the main priority, from the round headlights to the row of switches that seem to come straight out from a plane. By the way, if you've reached this point in the video, may I please ask you to subscribe? This is a new channel for me, and getting more subscribers helps a lot with YouTube further recommending my videos and therefore having more growth. Thank you very much. The Mini is among the few survivors from the era, as most of its competitors aged very poorly. But it's impossible to deny that 20 years later, fewer R53s survive. In fact, according to UK registration data, from the nearly 34,000 R53 Mini Cooper S that were in circulation originally, only around 18,000 remain, a figure that is likely to keep dropping year over year. As more Minis get taken off the road or totaled, the prices of those that remain stabilize or even rise.
In my opinion, a car with the history that I was just talking about, or with the characteristics that I will mention in this video, should only go up in value over time.
Underneath the hood is a 1.6 supercharged engine, and it sends out 168 or 170 horsepower, depending on which type of horsepower you're referring to the front wheels. And this unit in particular has an LSD, and that's not something illegal, it's actually a limited slip differential, which is actually very useful in a front-wheel drive car. So to record those about 20 seconds where I was talking a little bit about the engine took me like 10 minutes because I thought I was an idiot. I came over to the driver's side of the car to try to find the hood release latch, and I could not find it anywhere. And I've driven all kinds of cars. I've never had to open the hood on a Mini, admittedly, but I could not find the latch anywhere. And, you know, latches are pretty standard things usually in most cars. You see, on these Minis, these early Minis, it's on the passenger side. Took me a while to figure that out. And then I came over to the front. Now, I know something very cool about the hood opening on these cars is that they come out with headlights. You essentially lift up the entire front end of the car. But I could not find the hood release anywhere until I got to like about this point, and I said, it cannot be this far to the right. Right here I felt something weird, like a lever. And yes, it's right there. So it took me a while to figure that out.
Let's not fool ourselves with things such as aesthetics or history. What really makes this Mini be such a special car and thus a future classic is what I was just talking about, what's under the hood. The R53s had what was called the Tritec, a 4-cylinder engine designed by Chrysler and made in Brazil. Yes, all Minis of this era had Brazilian engines. Now, the Tritec engine itself is unremarkable, having been used by other cars such as the Chrysler Neon. However, what made these Minis stand out was the Eaton Supercharger they decided to just tack on. It made out 168 horsepower. It sounds incredible, as you'll hear in just a few minutes, and most importantly of all, it's unlike any of its rivals. Remember, when it comes to forced induction, almost all cars of this segment use turbos. A supercharger is almost unheard of. By 2006, however, they changed the engine to a more traditional turbo setup by using the infamous Peugeot THP engine, which in Mini form was called the Prince engine. I have to admit, Minis are not the most reliable of cars, known for having a series of issues from failing window regulators, bad power steering pumps, which, by the way, I think was starting to go out in this unit, to the typical leaks you'd expect from a 20-year-old British/German car. Nothing too serious though.
And now let's see what it is like to drive this 2005 Mini Cooper S. This car was originally built as a city car, not with the Cooper S in mind, but with the Mini Cooper in general. And city cars have usually fairly stiff suspensions, and if we set the scale of just how hard the suspension of this car is, especially in comparison to other city cars, the suspension of this car is very, very stiff. Of course, that's a lot of fun on the track, but I remember when these cars came out, a lot of people I knew who bought them, they actually sold them because they thought the suspension was too stiff. I'm talking about people who just wanted a car to drive around town. And going back to my point at the beginning of the video where I said that this car is a Bohemian Rhapsody of cars, I think that this is a car that's more suited to being driven in a spirited pace or on a track than around town running errands. The driving position is not cramped at all, which I've always found surprising in Minis. It does not feel like the MX-5 that I drove recently, which was a car where you felt that everything was really close to you, and where I felt that if I had been just a few centimeters taller, then I wouldn't have fit. I can certainly see someone maybe 10 or 15 centimeters taller than me driving this car without any issue. Now I'll take it on a road that has a few more bends where we can talk about the actual driving dynamics. The people who bought these cars new, from what I can remember from the statistics of the time, were overwhelmingly female, and they were not people who were really into cars. It was a car that a lot of people bought because of what they said about them, about how they'd be shown as cool people, rather than for the driving itself. Nowadays, I think most people buying Cooper S's, the R53s, are car people. People who want to drive them, people who want to modify them, people who want to take them out on a Sunday morning. Now, first of all, I want to accelerate a little bit because I want you to hear the supercharger, which is actually fairly loud inside this car. Another thing about this car, once you pick up speed, is that it is incredibly loud in here for a modern car. It's not the exhaust, actually. What is very loud inside this car is just the road noise and everything. It's not a very well insulated car. For me, that's a plus. For someone who were looking for something a bit more luxurious, perhaps that'd be a drawback. You can really hear the supercharger whine on this car. To be honest, when it comes to the sensations and the feeling that this car gives you, I was expecting a much more aggressive car. A car that wiggles its tail out like a lot of front-wheel drive cars do, and you've got to get it to keep going straight with the gas pedal, something that's very typical on hot hatches. That's something surprising for me. This is a very tame car. It's chill. It doesn't feel crazy. Our GoPro just overheated, and that's why GoPros suck. This car has two significant drawbacks in my experience. Number one is that most Mini owners from this generation complain that the brake discs are too small. The brakes get overheated very easily. That's something that a lot of people upgrade on these cars. And number two, the turning radius is much larger than what you'd expect on a car of this size and built to be a city car. It's not as nimble around town as you'd expect.
When it comes to equipment, I'd be hard-pressed to say that these Minis were fully loaded, especially when it comes to units without that many options. Here in particular, what stands out are the Harman Kardon speakers, climate control, heated seats, automatic headlights, and that's pretty much it. In the end, I love the Mini, but if you're looking for a small and nimble car and you're never carrying more than 2 people, I still can't get over how much I love the Mazda MX-5 in any of its generations. And Mini Cooper S money can certainly get you a very decent Mazda.
So all in all, I think that the Mini Cooper S, the R53 Cooper S, is a future classic without a doubt. It ticks all the boxes. It's a very cool car design-wise. It's got a cool engine with that supercharger. It's a car that was desirable. Back in its time, a lot of people wanted a Cooper S. It's a car that's perhaps unlike any of its era. And more importantly, year over year, there are fewer units left, especially in good condition. Don't be surprised if in 10 or 15 years, one of these Minis in the right color combination and with the right equipment costs twice or 3 times as much as this car costs today. I don't know, I knew I liked this car before coming to film this video, but now that I've gotten it to myself for a few hours and was really able to enjoy it, I'm even more certain this is a car that I'll have to have someday in my life. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, comment, and subscribe for more content on this channel. Thank you very much. Cheers!